The story begins with a cruel truth that defines the life of mercenaries. In their world, survival is failure. If a mercenary lives, it means he did not give enough. Their high pay exists for one reason only. They are expected to die without hesitation for whoever hires them. Our protagonist has heard this philosophy countless times, and it no longer moves him. Sitting amid chaos, he calmly drains his drink, staring into nothing. This is his life. This is what it means to be a mercenary. In his thoughts, nobles are all the same. They promise land, wealth, and titles when they need blood spilled. Once the war ends, those promises vanish. Still, even by those standards, his current employer has crossed a line. The scene reveals him standing on a city wall, facing a desperate noble commander. There is no misunderstanding. The noble truly expects him to die. At first, the mercenary laughs. He is not a knight bound by honor. He is a hired blade, not a sacrifice. The truth soon comes out. The city is lost. Rebels are closing in, and House Crawford is about to fall. The noble offers a final mission. The mercenaries must hold the line and die buying time for his escape. In return, he offers a red jewel as payment. The mercenary responds by knocking the jewel aside. His anger finally breaks through. The order is nothing more than a demand for him, and his men to act as disposable shields. They are meant to die buying time, with no chance of escape. Once the Lord is gone, the rebels would hunt them down without mercy. The noble argues that mercenaries would no longer be pursued after his death. But the mercenary knows better. That would only be true in a fair world, and this one is anything but fair. To the rebels, his group is not neutral. They are hated enemies marked for extermination. A memory surfaces showing why. In the past, enemy soldiers discovered what appeared to be a wounded ally in the forest. When they approached, the injured man struck without warning. It was an ambush. The attackers were mercenaries disguised in fallen armor. Their commander was cut down before he could react. There was no hesitation, no emotion, just efficiency. Returning to the present, the mercenary explains that he has personally killed many commanders. That is the real reason his group has survived for so long. It is also why the rebels want them erased, even more than they want the noble lord dead. The silence that follows confirms it. The noble intended to use the mercenaries as bait, drawing all enemy attention onto them. He does not deny it. Instead, he demands obedience. Refusal would mean execution and the seizure of command. Disgust replaces anger. The mercenary realizes that this noble is no different from the rest. Apologies mean nothing now. If necessary, he could hand over the commander's head to the rebels without hesitation. Escaping would be preferable, but even that option has already been closed off. Taking control of the situation, the mercenary declares himself captain. With the heads of 2 commanders as proof, the rebels would ease their pursuit. As the noble pieces it together, the truth becomes clear. To save his men, the mercenary intends to offer his own life. He explains his reasoning through action alone. He dragged his men into this brutal life. They trusted him, followed him, and believed they could survive together. That trust demands responsibility. Sword in hand, he accepts his role and prepares to lead them to the end. The noble watches in silence, struck by the weight of that resolve. He recognizes true leadership when he sees it, and admits that the mercenary embodies it better than any lord. With regret, he reflects on his own master, Zara Crawford, and acknowledges that things might have been different if the mercenary had held that position instead. With the decision made, the mercenary lunges forward. The noble does not resist. He closes his eyes. Unafraid, in the next instant, everything ends. The strike is too fast to perceive. Even the mercenary cannot react. He falls, defeated in a single motion. As life fades, the noble reflects on the cruelty of talent and fate. The mercenary, in his final moments, finds peace knowing his men were ordered to flee. He was always prepared for this ending. Yet one question lingers. How far could he have gone if he had been born with the same opportunities as the nobles he despised? Darkness gives way to light. A voice urges him to wake up. His eyes open in a luxurious room, and a red-haired young man stands nearby, calling for him to regain consciousness. Confused and weak, the mercenary looks around in a body that no longer feels like his own. Before he can process what is happening, a sharp slap sends his awareness spiraling. Pain flares and disbelief follows. The young man demands that he pull himself together, addressing him by a name that is not his own. That is when the truth hits him. He is no longer Jake. He has awakened as young Master Lucian. When Jack regains consciousness, he is completely shocked by what he sees. He cannot believe that he has awakened inside another person's body. He begins questioning himself, wondering where the filthy body he once had has gone. The body that always wore torn, old clothes. As he looks at his hands, he notices how clean they are, and is confused by the pleasant fragrance coming from them. His gaze then shifts to the man beside him, and Jack wonders who this person could be. He clearly remembers that only a moment ago this same man had slapped his cheek. Yet now the man is crying uncontrollably. The man is sobbing so hard that the bed beneath him is soaked. Through his tears, the man repeatedly calls Jack, "Young master," and thanks the gods endlessly, believing that the young master had died and that his heart had completely stopped. Watching this emotional display, Jack becomes even more confused. The man continues crying and claims that if the young master had truly died, his own life as a personal attendant would have been ruined, and he would never have been able to live peacefully with his family. Hearing this, Jack thinks to himself that the man is speaking complete nonsense. Words like young master, personal attendant, and family never existed in Jack's previous life. Jack clearly remembers how he died. His head had been cut clean off, making it impossible for anyone to revive him. As he carefully examines his body again, he becomes certain that this body does not belong to him. He begins wondering whose body it could be. Lost in thought, he falls silent for a while. After organizing the clues, Jack reaches a conclusion. His soul has undoubtedly entered someone else's body. He gets out of bed and looks at himself in the mirror. He realizes that this is no ordinary body. This is the body of someone who possesses the power to kill without hesitation. As this thought crosses his mind, a faint smile appears on his face. Touching the mirror, Jack senses that the scent of this body carries royal blood. From the room alone, he can tell that this child belongs to an extremely wealthy family. After reaching this realization, he looks back at the man and decides that the first thing he needs is information. Jack tells the man that he wants to ask him something. The man immediately responds respectfully, ready to answer anything. Jack then asks what year it is. Hearing this, the man is surprised and assumes that the medicine must have affected the young master's mind, causing lingering confusion. Without delay, the man explains that it is the 846th year of the Empire. Upon hearing this, Jack is stunned. He cannot believe that after his death, he has traveled 15 years into the future and awakened in a stranger's body. He calms himself, acknowledging that he does not know how this happened. But since it already has, there is nothing he can do to change it. He decides that focusing on what comes next is the only option. Jack then asks his next question directly. He asks whether the man had planned to kill the young master that day. The man is utterly shocked and struggles to understand what Jack is implying. Jack coldly observes him with suspicion and points out that a mere attendant touching the master's body without permission is unacceptable. Questioning whether the rules had changed while he was unconscious, the man becomes extremely frightened by these words. Jack continues pressing him and demands to know his identity. Overwhelmed, the man bows deeply and begs for forgiveness, admitting his mistake. He then reveals the identity of the body Jack now inhabits. The name is Lucien Valdec, the third son of the great Valdec family. Hearing this name, Jack is shaken. He remembers the Valdec family clearly. The family crest appears before him, followed by visions of their vast empire. The Valdec family has long been a pillar supporting the empire, a historic noble house closely tied to the emperor, with influence that rivals even the royal family itself. Jack realizes that entering this family will greatly benefit his future plans. It is also revealed that before his death, Jack had worked for many years as a guard for the Valdec family. Now, after death, he has reincarnated directly into the body of their third son. The reality feels unreal, yet undeniable. In his previous life, Jack never had money. He lived in torn clothes, struggled daily for food, and had no family left in the world. The only thing he possessed was self-belief, which shattered the moment he was murdered. Now that belief has returned, because Jack has become Lucien. Lucien opens the window and enjoys the sight of the sunrise. He decides that he will move forward freely under this new identity. The Valdec castle comes into view as Lucien begins walking through its halls. He explores the castle, amazed by its brilliance, realizing he has never seen such a magnificent place before. He knows he must adapt to life here. As he enters the main hall, he notices servants whispering and gossiping about him. They stare as if they are seeing him after many years. Lucien wonders why they are reacting this way, and begins suspecting that something about Lucien's past life in this body is wrong. He questions his personal attendant, Hans. Hans explains that since the young master fell asleep, no one except him has been allowed to meet Lucien, which is why everyone is shocked to see him now. Hans then reveals that a full year and 2 months have passed. Lucien senses that Hans is hiding the full truth. He realizes that despite being a noble, he holds no real authority here. The one with absolute control is the Grand Duke. Lucien understands that the Grand Duke would never nurture a useless son, and would discard him without hesitation if he brought no value. Lucien concludes that there must have been a serious problem with the original Lucien, one severe enough to warrant an assassination attempt and complete neglect from the Grand Duke. Until he understands the truth, Lucien decides to avoid meeting the Grand Duke. At that moment, another man appears and mentions hearing reports of the young master's recovery. His words draw Lucien's attention, while Hans becomes visibly nervous. This man is revealed to be Steward Edwin. The steward respectfully greets Lucien and expresses his happiness at seeing him recovered after such a long time. The steward asks whether Lucien is well enough to walk. Lucien remembers Edwin from his previous life, despite being brought into the mansion as a hostage from an enemy family during childhood. Edwin's exceptional abilities earned him control over the family's affairs, making him the right-hand man of Grand Duke Sigmund. Lucien feels tense, knowing Edwin is not someone to face without preparation. He recalls that during the entire year he lay unconscious. Edwin never once came to visit. Lucien decides to imitate the noble demeanor of the knight who once killed him, believing that nobility alone commands respect. With practiced politeness, Lucien expresses gratitude for Edwin's concern and assures him that he is feeling much better. He explains that since he had been isolated for so long, he was unfamiliar with the household's current affairs and had stepped out to look around. He then asks whether there has been any trouble within the family. Edwin is surprised by Lucien's sudden change in behavior, but replies that the Valdec family is as prosperous as ever. He also expresses relief at seeing the young master in good health. Lucien smiles and states that as long as he is present, nothing can go wrong within the family. Lucien becomes confident that Edwin suspects nothing. He resolves to continue behaving naturally. To escape further scrutiny, Lucien excuses himself, saying that his worries were unnecessary and that he feels tired after being outside for so long. He decides to return and rest. As Lucien leaves, Edwin mentions that someone wishes to meet him. If he permits it, hearing this, Lucien becomes anxious, realizing that the encounter he feared has finally arrived. In the next scene, Lucien stands inside the Duke's office. The Grand Duke sits before him. This man is Duke Sigmund. He glares at Lucien with intense anger. Lucien tries to remain calm and composed, though he is drenched in sweat from nervousness. Finally, Duke Sigmund demands an explanation. He questions how Lucien is still alive. With an icy expression, Duke Sigmund Valdec fixed his gaze on his son and raised a question so unsettling that it froze the air in the room. Lucien found himself unable to respond as the Duke's stare sharpened into something lethal. An oppressive silence spread, and the sheer pressure radiating from the man made it difficult to breathe. When Lucien finally reacted, it was only to show his confusion. Unable to grasp the meaning behind such a question, the Duke made it clear that he had tolerated his son's indulgent behavior for far too long. For a time, he had chosen to overlook it, believing grief was to blame. Lucien had used his mother's death as justification to abandon his responsibilities. But matters had gone too far when he locked himself away for more than a year in defiance of the world. To Duke Sigmund, this was no mere act of mourning. It was a deliberate act of self-destruction, a reckless disregard for life itself. Lucien's confusion deepened as the weight of the accusation sank in. Only then did a buried memory surface. Hands. The servant breaking down in tears. The image of the attendant sobbing uncontrollably at Lucien's bedside flooded his mind. And everything began to connect. That desperation, that fear, suddenly made sense. Attempting to calm the situation, Lucien considered the possibility of a misunderstanding. But the Duke had no patience left. He demanded the truth hidden deep within his son's heart, pushing him into a corner with no room to retreat. The accusation that followed was devastating. Lucien had attempted to end his own life by forcing sleeping pills down his throat. At that moment, something inside Lucien shifted. He realized why his memories felt incomplete, why his identity felt borrowed. The truth revealed itself with terrifying clarity. Lucien Valdec, the Duke's third son, had already died once before. In a past life, Lucien had worked as a security guard at the Valdec estate 15 years earlier. During that time, the head of the family had been Grand Duke Sigmund Valdec, a man with 4 children born of different mothers. Over a decade of service, Lucien had encountered every young master and each of their mothers. Yet one figure had always been absent, the third son and his mother. The reason was simple and tragic. The boy's mother had succumbed to illness at a young age, and not long after, the child followed her into death. At the time, the truth had remained hidden. The staff believed both mother and son had simply been frail and sickly. Only later did the real reason become clear. The loss of his mother, combined with his isolated position within the family, had crushed the boy's fragile heart. Desperate for acknowledgement, he had swallowed several sleeping pills, hoping to draw his father's attention. But after a year of self-imposed isolation, his body was far too weak. The medicine proved fatal, and the real Lucien Valdec vanished from the world. Remembering all this, the Duke's harsh rebuke suddenly felt more understandable. Despite everything, Duke Sigmund was still a father, and the pain of nearly losing a son must have been immense. Yet sympathy was a luxury Lucien could not afford. His own survival was at stake. This confrontation was not a reprimand, it was a final warning. The pressure intensified with every passing second. Lucien understood that one wrong move could shatter his future beyond repair. At best, he would be sent away to a monastery, stripped of influence and freedom. At worst, he would be exiled to the frozen north, forced to fight beasts until death claimed him. He refused to accept either fate. He would not allow the remnants of another man's family tragedy to destroy the life now placed in his hands. Resolute, Lucien chose to face the Duke head-on. He resolved to be truthful and took responsibility for disgracing the Valdec name and causing his father distress. He accepted that punishment was deserved and showed readiness to bear whatever consequences awaited him. Yet instead of clinging to regret, he shifted the focus forward. The past was immutable, and a life pulled back from the edge of oblivion could not remain shackled to it. Standing with renewed determination, Lucien made it clear that he would no longer live chained to what had already happened. He chose to walk toward the future, asking not to be seen merely as a problem or an heir, but as a son. All he sought was acknowledgement, proof that repentance had meaning, and that a father could still embrace a child who wished to change. From the side, the butler Edwin watched in stunned silence. He had sensed a change in the young master, but never imagined something so profound. The timid boy who once avoided conflict had been replaced by someone composed, confident and unflinching. The atmosphere grew heavy as father and son locked eyes, neither willing to yield. Duke Sigmund eventually tightened his fist, clearly taken aback by the audacity of being confronted in such a manner. Yet beneath his stern exterior, a trace of satisfaction surfaced. He had lived long enough to believe he had seen everything, and this moment amused him in a grim way. Lucien maintained his composure, realizing his gamble had paid off. He understood now that the Duke respected resolve far more than weakness. The Duke acknowledged that his son had returned from the brink, though not without irony, and demanded to know what path Lucien intended to walk from this point onward. After a moment of careful thought, Lucien outlined his intentions clearly. First, he needed to restore his ruined body. Only after regaining his strength would he pursue his next goal, mastering the sword. The brief glimpse of swordsmanship he had once witnessed left a deep impression, and he intended to learn it properly. The Duke questioned the practicality of such ambitions, but Lucien remained firm. With proper rest, food, and discipline, he was confident his body would recover. Duke Sigmund appeared satisfied, though he warned that words alone meant nothing without results. With the matter seemingly settled, the Duke summoned Edwin and instructed him to bring something back to Lucien. The butler remarked inwardly that actions carried far more weight than eloquent promises. Lucien, uneasy, wondered what this mysterious gesture would entail. Not long after, activity filled the vast Valdec mansion. Workers moved back and forth as two men struggled to carry an enormous wooden chest inside. When it was finally opened, its contents stunned everyone present. The chest was filled to the brim with gold and jewels, an overwhelming display of wealth. Lucien and his attendants stared in disbelief. The sheer amount was absurd, a vivid demonstration of what it truly meant to belong to a noble house. Lifting a handful of gold coins, Lucien realized this fortune was likely meant to cover just a single month. A slow smile formed on his face. With resources like these, he could finally act. He now had the means to rebuild his body and create the elixir. He desperately needed to grow stronger and secure his future. A short while later, the scene shifts to a vast and lavish greenhouse hidden within the depths of the Valdec mansion. Exotic plants flourish beneath glass ceilings, filling the air with quiet life. Duke Sigmund Valdec walks through the greenery alongside the butler. Edwin, their steps unhurried, as they discuss matters of importance. Edwin reflects that this place had once been the late Duchess's most cherished sanctuary. Since her passing, the Duke had avoided it entirely, making this sudden visit unusual and meaningful. The reason for his return becomes clear. The drastic change in Lucien has stirred something long buried within the Duke. Lucien is the son of the woman Duke Sigmund, loved above all others, and abandoning him was never truly an option. As the Duke continues forward, Edwin recalls how Lucien used to be, timid to the point of misery, constantly frightened by his surroundings. Any raised voice would reduce him to trembling submission, like a wounded animal expecting another blow. To the Duke, that weakness had always seemed foreign, utterly unlike the woman who gave Lucien life. He believed his son had inherited only her appearance, not her spirit, yet now for the first time, a faint smile crosses his face as doubt creeps in. Perhaps his judgment had been flawed all along. The memory of Lucien meeting his gaze without fear resurfaces, and Edwin confirms what he witnessed. He believes the young master is gentle by nature, but undeniably carries Valdec blood. Still, Duke Sigmund remains unconvinced. Words and posture alone will not determine anything. What lies ahead will demand far more than confidence. Edwin then raises a troubling issue. Lucien's financial support has been restored, but the funds are steadily disappearing. After careful investigation, Edwin discovered the cause lies with the second son, Jordi Valdec. Jordi has been siphoning Lucien's allowance and has even replaced Lucien's maid with a spy to monitor his every move. While the Duke understands Jordi's resentment, The extent of his actions exceeds expectations. Edwin offers to intervene, but Duke Sigmund forbids it. This, he decides, is a necessary ordeal. Lucian wasted an entire year of his life, and this is the price he must now pay. The Duke sees the situation as a trial. If Lucian cannot endure it, then he is unworthy of the Valdec name. Blood alone means nothing unless the one who bears it has the strength to unlock their own destiny. Several days pass, and the story returns to the long corridors of the Valdec mansion. Two maids whisper among themselves, wondering if the young master has once again sealed himself away. Hans suddenly appears, visibly upset, revealing that 3 full days have already passed. Moments later, shock overtakes him as he looks inside Lucian's room. Hans recalls Lucian telling him that the meeting with Duke Sigmund had gone well, and that the financial support had returned. The image of the massive chest overflowing with gold coins and jewels resurfaces in his mind. Knowing how strained their relationship had been, Hans understands that this outcome could not have come easily. With tears forming in his eyes, he believes Lucian must have shown incredible courage. To him, it feels like his master has finally chosen to move forward. Inside the room, Lucian is in high spirits, laughing as he tosses gold coins into the air. His eyes gleam with an almost unsettling intensity as he revels in the fortune before him. With such wealth at his disposal, his long-awaited plans can finally begin. He can restore his broken body and create the elixir he has dreamed of for so long. Lucian wastes no time. He immediately begins his preparations, working tirelessly until sweat drips from his brow. Despite the questions Hans must be holding back, Lucian knows the servant's loyalty runs deeper than it appears. Spread across the table are alchemical tools and stacks of books. Among them lies an herb of extreme rarity, moonlight grass, a plant that grows only under moonlight and commands an outrageous price. Lucian spent every coin he had to acquire it. He remembers ordering Hans to buy every last bit of moonlight grass available. Though his actions may appear insane now, he knows that within a year, everything will make sense. His confidence is absolute. The herb's value will multiply tenfold or more, and he will amass a fortune beyond imagination. Reflecting on the past, Lucian admires the audacity of ancient alchemists. They had gambled everything on an unproven idea, buying up all the moonlight grass in the empire, without knowing whether their creation would even work. That reckless courage reshaped history. From it emerged an elixir that shook the empire itself, the legendary drink of the gods. At first, the name sparked outrage and accusations of blasphemy. Its creators were threatened, but once its effects were revealed, condemnation turned into reverence. The elixir shattered a belief that had stood for over 1,000 years, the idea that a warrior's potential was fixed at birth. It proved that destiny could be altered. With a single sip, even the talentless could become swordsmen. Lucian knows his own creation is only a crude imitation, inferior to the original in every way. But for repairing his ruined body, nothing else compares. Casting a sideways glance at his reflection, he considers the former owner of this body extraordinarily fortunate. When chaos eventually swept the empire, the Alchemists' Guild was the first to be destroyed. Deemed too dangerous, fear erased the elixir's recipe from history. Yet in his previous life, Lucian pieced together fragments of forgotten knowledge and recreated a version of it himself. Now, with everything prepared, he drinks the elixir without hesitation. What follows surpasses his expectations. Mana, the refined power drawn from nature, surges through his body. The potion forcibly expands his mana pathways. Yet instead of agony, the flow feels smooth and natural, as if it had always belonged there. Even newborns possess impurities that restrict mana circulation. Yet Lucian feels none. This realization sparks a chilling thought. The body he inhabits is far from ordinary. In that moment, Lucian finally understands the truth. The old Lucian was no failure. He was one of those rare beings the world calls a genius. As the sun sinks beyond the horizon, night quietly settles in, marking the beginning of a new chapter for Lucian. Outside his room, Hans paces the hallway in mounting panic. The servant looks on the verge of tears, haunted by memories of the long period when Lucian once shut himself away from the world. Too much time has passed without any response, and fear gnaws at him relentlessly. At last the door opens. Lucian steps out calmly, his expression composed, as if nothing unusual has occurred. Hans is immediately overwhelmed, his anxiety spilling over after holding it in for so long. The servant had called out countless times without receiving an answer, forbidden from entering and left alone with terrifying thoughts. He had been certain that something horrible had happened inside. Lucian listens without visible emotion, a faint smirk resting on his face. The confidence radiating from him feels unfamiliar, almost unsettling. His eyes no longer carry the dull haze they once did. Instead, they gleam with clarity and resolve. Hans cannot shake the strange feeling that the young master standing before him is both familiar and completely different. Lucian notices the servant's confusion and understands it well. Hans has always watched him closely, so sensing a change is only natural. Outwardly, Lucian's body shows little difference for now. True recovery still requires time, proper nourishment and rest. What truly matters, however, is the transformation happening within. Inside his body, change is occurring at an astonishing pace, far faster than Lucian ever anticipated. This only confirms his suspicion. The original Lucian's natural constitution made this rapid transformation possible. There is no longer any doubt about the body's potential. This talent places him among the rare individuals capable of reshaping the world itself. If everything continues smoothly, Lucian is confident he could surpass his former mercenary self in less than a year. Lucian then turns his attention back to Hans. In his mind, this opportunity exists partly because of the servant's loyalty. For Lucian, rewards and consequences must always be clear. He makes it known that Hans should listen carefully. As this will not be repeated, Lucian instructs him to gather everything he owns and invest it without hesitation. In return, he promises Hans a life more comfortable than anything he has ever imagined. Together, they will rise to the very top. Lucian even finds himself envying Hans, knowing that in his past life, no noble had ever extended such trust to him. A week later, Lucian and Hans walk along a quiet forest path. The atmosphere is peaceful, and Lucian appears far more relaxed than before. He strolls casually, Hans resting behind his head, openly enjoying the calm surroundings. Hans follows behind, still uncertain, watching his master as if trying to understand this sudden transformation. Lucian is struck by how perfect everything feels. The comfort of clean rooms, warm meals, and noble luxury still feels surreal. In his previous life, hunger had been a constant companion, but now it is nothing more than a distant memory. This comfort has allowed him to focus entirely on his recovery. More importantly, he has resolved an issue that weighed heavily on his mind. What troubled him most was the existence of his past self, Jake, the guard who once worked in this very mansion. After discreetly questioning the guard captain, Lucian learned that no one matching his former appearance was employed there anymore. Even the shift he once worked had been taken over by a complete stranger. To Lucian, this was a relief. Encountering his old self would only have caused unnecessary turmoil. He knows himself well enough to admit he lacks the courage to face that past, and would likely collapse from sheer embarrassment. Hans notices his master suddenly tense up, trembling for reasons he cannot understand. When Lucian turns around, his expression becomes serious, drawing the servant's attention immediately. Hans hesitantly questions whether Lucian truly intends to go there. The training grounds have always been a place Lucian avoided. Even approaching them used to fill him with dread. Hans desperately seeks confirmation, recalling how the young master swore never to return after being humiliated by the second son. Lucian understands all too well. Within the Valdek household, swordsmanship is a basic expectation. That was precisely why Jordi had used the training grounds as a weapon, driving the original Lucian away through fear and cruelty. Lucian acknowledges the past, but refuses to let it define him any longer. Those days are over. Taking a decisive step forward, he makes it clear that his resolve is absolute. All he asks of Hans now is trust, and to follow without hesitation. Before long, they arrive at the massive training hall, a structure both grand and intimidating. Inside, a pair of men speak quietly, surprised by what they see. News quickly spreads that the third young master has arrived of his own will, accompanied by his servant. One of them finds the situation amusing, convinced that Lucian could not have forgotten what happened here before. Seeing opportunity rather than concern, he orders the news to be reported immediately. A cruel smile forms as the man decides to prepare something special for Lucian. Unaware of the brewing malice, Lucian surveys the training hall with genuine interest. The space exceeds his expectations. Weapons line the walls in abundance, sturdy enough to withstand serious training. The hall itself is vast, offering more than enough room to move freely. Lucian is momentarily stunned to realize that all of this belongs to a single individual within the household. He cannot help but think that if he had access to a place like this in his past life, some of his comrades might have survived longer. Soon, a mustached man approaches, confirming that his eyes had not deceived him. It truly is the third young master. The instructor recalls, with unsettling clarity, how Lucian once fled in terror from Jordi. That memory remains vivid, etched deeply into his mind. To him, Lucian had looked like prey being chased by a predator, utterly helpless. The man mocks Lucian's presence and belittles Hans for daring to step into a sacred place meant for warriors. He introduces himself as Hendrik, wearing a smile that carries no warmth. He remembers assisting Jordi during Lucian's training a year ago, recalling every moment with disturbing amusement. Images surface of the old Lucian trembling uncontrollably while gripping a wooden sword. Frozen by fear, Hendrik had found the entire scene entertaining. In response, Lucian offers nothing more than a faint smile. Rather than anger, his expression carries intrigue. As he looks at Hendrik, Lucian realizes that this despicable instructor has just made things far more interesting. Within his thoughts, Lucian reflects on what knights truly are. They are born into noble households, drilled from childhood, and only acknowledged after surviving harsh battles and dangerous assignments. Once they prove their worth, their lord grants them the title of knight, completing their rise in status. Yet stripped of ceremony and pride, Lucian sees them as little more than costly hunting dogs, adorned with elegant collars. That realization explains their behavior perfectly. They bow politely to the nobles who supply their wealth, power, and honor, because their entire existence depends on that favor. This understanding makes Hendrik's arrogance stand out even more. Lucian quickly realizes that his own terrible reputation within the household fuels much of this disrespect. Still, the real source of the instructor's attitude lies elsewhere. Deep down, men like Hendrik feel untouchable because they are shielded by someone far more powerful. Their confidence does not come from themselves, but from the protection behind them. The more Lucian observes, the more exhausted he becomes. The entire situation irritates him to no end. For a brief moment, he even imagines correcting their twisted mindset through a brutal training session, picturing a blade flying straight at the instructor's face with full force. But reason prevails. Lucian knows that acting on such impulses would not go unnoticed. Duke Sigmund would never ignore harm done to valuable knights, and any severe punishment would only create unnecessary conflict. This is not the moment to retaliate. Choosing restraint, Lucian decides to endure for now. Running from training, because of the past, would be nothing short of pathetic. He has already made up his mind. He will learn swordsmanship, and he will not waste any more time. When the subject of sword forms comes up, the instructor's reaction turns mocking. In Hendrik's view, Lucian's ambition is nothing but a poorly timed joke. According to him, learning to fight after a certain age is pointless. Sword forms, he claims, are secret techniques passed down from ancient ancestors and only function when the body's mana pathways are open. Without that condition, those forms become hollow movements devoid of meaning. From his perspective, this limitation suits Lucian perfectly. Instead of wielding a sword, the young master would be better off performing graceful movements, perhaps tending to the mansion's gardens. In his eyes, everyone has a role, and Lucian's talents clearly lie elsewhere. Hendrik finds amusement in what he believes is Lucian's inability to respond. Whether the explanation about mana is true or not hardly matters to him. His objective has already been achieved. He sees before him a foolish youth crushed by ignorance, unable to fight back, frozen by fear even when openly humiliated by someone beneath him. Lucian, however, calmly addresses the instructor by name and challenges the foundation of his claims. What Hendrik described does not align with what Lucian knows. Mana pathways do not close in the teenage years. They remain open until the age of 25. Lucian subtly questions whether this misinformation could really be correct, especially considering that his brother Jordi would never accept such nonsense. Caught off guard, Hendrik falters, unable to openly contradict the second son. He hesitates. Lucian seizes the moment, feigning shock as if realizing something horrifying. He acts as though this revelation proves that House Valdek is already heading toward ruin, turning the situation into a dramatic display. He presents the mistake as an unforgivable scandal, something so basic that even the most ignorant creature should know better. Lucian escalates the performance, suggesting that countless talents may have been lost because of this ignorance. He frames the issue as a disgrace to the entire house and a crisis that cannot be ignored. Then, shifting his focus back to the instructor, he questions whether Hendrik would truly dare to deceive the son of his lord. The training ground plunges into dead silence. All eyes turn toward the confrontation. Hendrik, now visibly shaken, hurriedly denies any intention of deception. Lucian immediately dismisses his own outburst as meaningless rambling, asking with a faint smirk whether a knight of House Valdek would ever stoop to such petty behavior. The instructor desperately denies it again, and Lucian responds as though that was exactly the answer he expected. But instead of ending there, he declares that this makes the matter even more serious, far too serious to simply brush aside. With a grave expression, Lucian prepares to explain further. At that very moment, a silver-haired man steps into the training ground, silently observing the chaos that has unfolded. The moment the instructor noticed his master's presence, panic overtook him. Hendrik rushed forward, desperate to justify himself, but the tremor in his movements betrayed his fear. Before he could say much, he was silenced instantly. Jordi Valdek needed no explanations. With cold certainty, he made it clear that everything had already been seen and understood. Jordi approached the instructor without haste and made his judgment obvious through his expression alone. Hendrik's behavior had been witnessed from start to finish, and his disgrace was impossible to deny. Being pushed into a corner by a mere child was, in Jordi's eyes, utterly shameful. He made it clear that such cowardice was unacceptable and warned the man not to embarrass himself further. After dealing with the instructor, Geordie turned his attention toward Lucien. Hans immediately sensed the hostility and felt a wave of fear, but Lucien merely observed his brother with an amused smirk. Geordie Valdec, the second son of the house, was no stranger to him. From memories of his past life, Lucien knew exactly what kind of man he was. Geordie had built his influence by drawing in outsiders, most of whom eventually met grim ends. Anyone deemed useless was discarded without hesitation. Often after being framed, Lucien greeted his brother with calm composure, which only seemed to irritate Geordie further. The second son examined him closely, clearly displeased, and made his contempt evident. He revealed that he had witnessed the entire confrontation with the instructor, and accused Lucien of dragging the name of House Valdec through the mud. Lucien responded with deliberate innocence, forcing Geordie to spell out his accusation. According to him, the instructor had made nothing more than a minor theoretical error. Yet Lucien had deliberately used Geordie's name to provoke chaos. That, Geordie declared, was unforgivable. He made it clear that Hendrik would not be punished, emphasizing the instructor's loyalty to the house, something he openly contrasted against Lucien's past behavior. Geordie went on to belittle Lucien for abandoning his training and attempting to shift blame onto others. Respect for the knights, he implied, was the bare minimum expected of a Valdec. After all, it was their swords and loyalty that upheld the house's power. Turning toward the other knights, Geordie completed his performance by apologizing on Lucien's behalf, dismissing him as nothing more than a childish and immature younger brother. With a dark smile, he made it known that he would be watching Lucien closely from now on. Inside, Lucien acknowledged that his brother was sharper than expected. Geordie had skillfully reframed the insult toward Hendrik as an offense against all knights, protecting himself while reinforcing his authority. Recognizing the move for what it was, Lucien answered with nothing more than a faint smirk. He then acted as though everything had gone exactly as anticipated. Instead of lashing out, he treated Geordie's actions as valuable guidance rather than punishment. This unexpected response caught everyone off guard. Hans nearly panicked, sensing danger, but Lucien pressed on, exaggerating his gratitude and treating the humiliation as a lesson worth preserving. The knights around them were left stunned by the display. Within Geordie's mind, the situation had taken an unexpected turn. His intention had been to erase Lucien's weak image. Yet what stood before him now was clearly no longer the timid third son everyone remembered. Lucien's confidence was undeniable. After making his point, Lucien calmly prepared to leave. Asking for permission with deliberate politeness, he made it clear that lingering any longer would serve no purpose. Geordie's fury flared, his anger evident as Lucien began to turn away. Lucien halted only long enough to remind his brother of one crucial detail. Their father was watching. Unlike Geordie, Lucien had nothing left to lose. Interpreting the silence around him as consent, Lucien seized Hans by the hand and fled the training ground without hesitation, calling a casual farewell as they disappeared. Hans, terrified, could barely keep up as they ran. Behind them, Hendrik approached Geordie, who remained frozen in place. Seething, the instructor demanded to know whether Lucien would truly be allowed to escape so easily. Geordie responded with nothing, but a glare filled with hatred, his presence radiating dark intent. Sometime later, sunlight filters through the trees as the training ground fades into the distance. Lucien and Hans walk quietly through the forest, the chaos behind them slowly settling. Hans keeps glancing back, fear still etched across his face, clearly worried about what consequences might follow. Lucien reassures him in his own way, fully aware of the kind of man Geordie is. Hans, on the verge of panic, is convinced that the second son will never let this go. Lucien understands that fear all too well. From his past experiences, he knows how infuriating it is to suffer under a useless superior, someone who creates disasters and then avoids responsibility while others pay the price. This time, however, he refuses to let history repeat itself. He is certain that a mere knight will not be allowed to trample on his people. Extending his hand to Hans, Lucien acknowledges the hardship his attendant has endured. When leaders act foolishly, it is always those beneath them who suffer the most, and for someone as close to him as Hans, the burden must have been even heavier. With a serious expression, Lucien makes a single, unwavering promise. He will never again allow those under his care to be humiliated or forced to live in fear because of his own weakness. That vow is sealed with a firm handshake, marking the beginning of a bond built on trust rather than submission. On a bright, sunlit day within the palace, Lucien and Hans moved quietly through the long corridors. Their footsteps echoed faintly, matching the serious expressions on their faces. Ever since the incident at the training grounds, a lingering sense of unease had settled in Lucien's chest. The silence that followed felt unnatural. He knew Geordie, the second young master, far too well to believe that man would swallow humiliation and do nothing in return. Geordie was not someone who endured insults. He always retaliated. as Lucien tightened his grip around a folded sheet of paper. His suspicions were confirmed. His eyes scanned the document with open disgust, realizing that this was the scheme Geordie had been preparing all along. The timing was deliberate and the intent unmistakable. Even Hans, usually timid and reserved, could no longer suppress his anger. His hands clenched tightly as frustration finally spilled over. Lucien calmly turned to him and asked if he was prepared. Hans answered without hesitation. The issue was no longer minor. Lucien's anger sharpened as he realized the true target of this move: his allowance. Hans added that his own salary had also been reduced. Lucien explained that the problem began with the budget report delivered that morning. It should have been a routine replenishment of funds, a chance to restock supplies and move forward. Instead, the moment he opened the letter, everything froze. The paper had slipped from his hands, drifting to the floor. Printed clearly at the top were the words "budget summary." His allowance had been slashed by 75%. Hans's pay had been reduced by 30%. The message was unmistakable. Lucien understood immediately what had happened. Geordie had used his authority to interfere through official channels, disguising the act as routine administration. Even among nobles, such manipulation of funds bordered on a crime severe enough to warrant execution. This was not a careless mistake. It was a calculated strike. They soon reached a private room, and Lucien pushed the door open while calmly reflecting on the situation. The only reason this power play had succeeded was because he had left an opening. After his mother's passing, Lucien had delegated control of his finances to others. That responsibility had once belonged to Dana, the former head maid who had served him loyally for many years. Now, however, that authority rested in entirely different hands. A woman stepped forward and bowed with practiced politeness. She introduced herself as Jenny, the newly appointed head maid assigned to replace Dana. She claimed this was her first proper meeting with Lucien, and added that she had wanted to greet him earlier. With a faintly mocking tone, she remarked that Lucien had shown no intention of leaving his room for a long time, implying that his extended seclusion had finally come to an end. Hans bristled at her words, but Lucien raised a hand. Stopping him, he calmly acknowledged that her observation was not entirely wrong. Then, with a faint smile, he stated that they would keep the conversation short, as there was a far more pressing issue to address. Lucien tightened his grip on the document and directly asked whether she had drafted the budget plan. He presented the paper to her. Jenny's expression briefly shifted to surprise before she broke into a smile, and then laughter. She dismissed the matter as trivial, questioning why Lucien would summon her over something as insignificant as budget management. She openly admitted that she had written it, explaining that Lucien himself had granted full authority to the former head maid, and she was simply carrying out the duties passed down to her. In her view, this was work Lucien should have handled personally. Lucien's expression hardened. He had anticipated this response. Part of the blame did lie with him, and he acknowledged that fact. Still, something did not align. He pointed out that most of the funds allocated by his father were meant to raise servant salaries, compensating for his past neglect. As he spoke, the surrounding maids visibly trembled. Lucien then questioned why Hans's salary had been cut instead of increased. The action was far too blatant to be dismissed as coincidence. Jenny smiled again, feigning surprise, and claimed it must have been an error. Managing a household involved countless responsibilities. After all, she turned to the others, asking them to confirm how overworked she was. Immediately, the surrounding staff nodded in agreement, awkwardly supporting her claim while shifting the blame onto themselves. Lucien was unconvinced. With a calm but commanding voice, he ordered them to stop. Stepping forward, he remarked that while the body might belong to one master, the hands and feet were clearly following another's orders. He walked toward the door, then turned back and asked one final question, instructing her to answer carefully. Did she truly know whom she was meant to serve? Jenny replied sharply, stating that she would need to consult Lord Geordie about that matter. The scene shifted to a dark alley. Lucien reflected that infected flesh had to be cut away for the body to survive. No matter how painful the process, his heartbeat quickened as he walked. At the corner stood a rowdy bar, overflowing with noise and chaos. Lucien and Hans entered, both concealed beneath cloaks. Hans questioned him, confused, remarking that he thought Lucien planned to fish to calm his mind. This place clearly did not match that idea. Lucien ignored the comment and focused instead on the center of the bar, where two fighters were brawling viciously while spectators screamed and cheered. Bets were shouted openly, voices filled with bloodlust and excitement. They moved toward the counter. The bartender, polishing a glass, warned them that suspicious figures were not welcome. Without a word, Lucien placed a heavy sack on the counter. The bartender froze. Lucien removed his disguise and calmly questioned why a gambling establishment would be so selective about its customers, asking whether the man truly wanted business at all. Lucien had several reasons for not acting rashly against the maid. First, Jenny was no ordinary servant. She was the daughter of the nanny who had raised Geordie from infancy, someone deeply rooted in the second young master's inner circle. Moving against her without preparation would only escalate the conflict and invite unnecessary retaliation. Second, and far more importantly, this entire situation stemmed from Lucien's own mistake. Before his reincarnation, he had been unfamiliar with the inner workings of household authority and administration. He had handed over power without fully grasping the consequences, believing that such blatant abuse would never occur. Reality, however, proved otherwise. Lucien understood that this issue could not be resolved through common sense alone. It demanded a deliberate and calculated response. More than that, he was certain the Archduke was not ignorant of what was happening behind the scenes. This meant the situation itself was a form of trial. If that was the case, then Lucien intended to demonstrate his capability clearly. As these thoughts settled in his mind, the same staff member from earlier guided him once more through the bar and seated him comfortably at a table. The surface was littered with scattered cards, clear evidence of countless completed games. Lucien picked up a deck with calm indifference, deciding that, if he was already there, he might as well earn some money along the way. It did not take long for the man sitting across from him to begin trembling uncontrollably. A crowd gathered, murmuring in disbelief as Lucien continued winning round after round. The opponent was meant to be an experienced gambler, yet he looked utterly defeated. Eventually, the man conceded and withdrew from the table. Lucien idly flipped a coin between his fingers, clearly unbothered, while the defeated gambler retreated in shame. Hans stood frozen beside him, clutching his head in disbelief. At some point, the young master had gained an almost terrifying level of skill, and Hans could not recall when that change had occurred. Lucien, visibly bored, leaned back and casually rested one leg atop the table, inviting another challenger. However, no one stepped forward. He had come here to stir rumors and draw attention, yet the lack of resistance made the whole affair feel dull. Lowering his gaze, Lucien concluded that after taking so much from them, it was time for the true target to reveal himself. Almost on cue, the door opened. A man entered while adjusting his cuffs, wearing a courteous smile that failed to hide the shift his presence caused in the atmosphere. He approached Lucien directly and introduced himself as Hugo, the manager of the establishment. With a simple gesture, Hugo summoned a butler, who immediately announced that the bar would be closing for the day due to unavoidable circumstances. Servants swiftly moved through the room, repeating the message and escorting guests outside, while promising generous compensation on their next visit. Once the bar was cleared, Hugo turned back toward Lucien and spoke with open respect, explaining that the inconvenience to others was a small price to pay if Lucien could enjoy himself in comfort. Lucien responded pleasantly, noting that it had been a long time since he last went out and praising Hugo's sharp instincts. Such intuition, he remarked, was essential for survival in this line of work. Hugo apologized for his delayed greeting, but Lucien dismissed the matter, explaining that he had only sought a change of pace. Hugo's eyes drifted to the towering pile of coins on the table, and he admitted his amazement. It had been a long time since anyone had amassed such winnings in his establishment. He then offered himself as Lucien's opponent. Though he acknowledged that he stood little chance, he believed his years of experience might at least help pass the time. Hans immediately grew uneasy and urged Lucien to leave. They had already won more than enough, and something about this man felt fundamentally different. Hans had seen many dangerous figures within the palace, but this presence stood apart from the rest. Lucien recognized the warning. Hans had earned his position as a personal attendant through instinct as much as loyalty. With just a glance at Hugo's hands, Lucien confirmed his identity. This was Black Shark Hugo, a name he remembered vividly from his previous life. A ruthless figure who began in the city's darkest alleys, Hugo had risen through sheer brutality and cunning. He expanded into gambling, smuggling, and contract killings, eventually becoming the king of the night who ruled 5 territories from the shadows. Later, amid the Empire's instability, he would declare himself a baron and emerge as a warlord. For now, however, Hugo was still in his early stages. That only made him more dangerous. Lucien smiled faintly. This was the shark he had come to catch. As the cards were laid out, Lucien suggested a simple game. Hugo readily agreed and removed any upper limit on betting. Determined not to let such an important guest grow bored, Lucien appeared delighted, pleased to have finally met someone who understood him. Behind him, Hans's anxiety only deepened. Hugo maintained his courteous smile, inwardly dismissing Lucien as nothing more than a spoiled noble relying on his family's influence. He failed to realize that this very exchange would become the starting point of his downfall. As the dealer prepared the cards, Hugo subtly signaled him, confident that the young master would sink deeper the more he lost. Lucien, on the other hand, remained relaxed and cheerful, as though nothing could go wrong. Before the game began, he shifted the conversation in an unexpected direction. He expressed admiration for Hugo's ability to manage such a large operation, even one that operated outside the law. Leadership, after all, could be judged by the quality of one's subordinates. If Hugo had truly crossed an unacceptable line, he would have been eliminated long ago. Hugo responded carefully, emphasizing that he always knew his place and never offended those above him. Lucien laughed, reassuring him that House Valdec was not so rigid. Then, with unsettling calm, Lucien asked when Hugo planned to begin large-scale production. Hugo froze. Lucien's gaze remained steady as he clarified that he was referring to the operation hidden in the back, an illegal one. The moment that implication settled in the air, the atmosphere around the table grew heavy and suffocating. The moment Lucien calmly introduces the concept of illegality, the air inside the room turns dense and oppressive. The suffocating pressure spreads instantly, causing even the servants to break into cold sweat. Hand stiffens in place, fear written plainly across his face, while Hugo freezes as though struck by sudden illness. His body locked and unresponsive, Hugo forces himself to regain composure, struggling to speak as he feigns ignorance. He pretends not to understand what Lucien is implying, insisting that he has never heard of anything illegal and claiming complete innocence. Lucien offers no immediate rebuttal. Instead, he quietly places more money onto the table, his actions unhurried and deliberate, making it clear that pretense is pointless. With a faint, detached smile, Lucien lays bare the truth. Hugo had been commissioned by the Marquis Lauren family to destabilize Valdec territory through the circulation of illegal drugs. Lucien's gaze sharpens as he dismisses the sheer recklessness of such an order. For a Marquis family to issue instructions so crude and disrespectful reveals a complete lack of regard. There exists a line that should never be crossed, and Hugo has already stepped far beyond it. Hugo offers no response. Sweat streams down his face, his breathing growing erratic as panic takes hold. Lucien continues calmly, remarking that Hugo's audacity is almost admirable. Smuggling illegal substances into another city was bold enough, but doing so within Valdec territory borders on suicidal. The moment anything goes wrong, every individual tied to Valdec would tear him apart without hesitation or mercy. The pressure inside the room continues to mount. Lucien silently studies Hugo, fully aware that his mind must be in chaos. Failure means death. The plan has been exposed prematurely, and the enemy he now faces is the Valdec family, the worst possible outcome. Under normal circumstances, this operation would have remained hidden for years. By the time reports reached the Grand Duke, Hugo would have already vanished. Lucien's knowledge from his previous life allowed him to uncover the scheme before it could fully unfold. Hugo finally breaks the silence, desperately insisting that there must be a misunderstanding. Lucien repeats the word slowly, demanding clarification on what exactly has been misunderstood. Trembling, Hugo claims he is merely a struggling shop owner barely scraping by, arguing that involvement with drugs makes no sense and must be a malicious rumor spread by jealous rivals. He swears that, if given the opportunity, he would personally uncover the source of the slander. Lucien cuts through the lie without mercy. He compares the claim to the supposed legitimacy of Hugo's flour mill, noting that the underground passage beneath it is allegedly nothing more than a secret escape route leading outside the city. Lucien makes it clear this is the final question. He asks what stage the operation has reached. Hugo is utterly stunned. Words fail him as sweat pours from his face. At last, he collapses back into his chair. His thoughts briefly clear, and reality sets in. Lucien knows about the fake shop and the hidden passage. At that point, excuses become meaningless. A dangerous idea surfaces in Hugo's mind: elimination. The servants sense the shift immediately. One by one, they subtly move, hands inching toward concealed weapons. After all, an unguarded noble could be killed mid-conversation. Before that thought can take shape, Lucien speaks coldly, warning Hugo to consider his next move carefully. This gamble carries only one stake: his life. Hands trembles behind Lucien, terror etched across his face. Hugo's clenched fist slowly relaxes. Lucien reminds him of how hard he worked to reach this position. Hugo berates himself internally for such foolish thoughts. Attacking a successor of the Valdec family would be no different from seeking a horrific death. His imagination runs wild with visions of the punishment awaiting him, far worse than execution. Eventually, Hugo closes his eyes and exhales deeply. Survival wins, lowering his head. He begs for mercy, realizing that Lucien's personal appearance itself proves there is another purpose. If execution were the goal, his life would have already ended. Desperation overtakes him. Hugo declares his willingness to become anything Lucien demands. Abandoning pride entirely, at that moment, every servant drops to their knees as well, pleading for forgiveness. Lucien remains silent for a long moment before standing slowly. Keeping a dog, he decides, is not such a bad idea. He happens to need reliable hands and feet. Relief floods through Hugo as he repeatedly swears absolute loyalty. Lucien steps closer, then pauses. Simply being a hunting dog would never satisfy someone like Hugo forever. Lucien places a hand on him and poses a single question: whether he wishes to become a knight. Hugo's eyes widen as the room falls silent. Becoming a knight had once been his dream, one he pursued obsessively before reality crushed it. No matter his skill, he would always be disposable. His birth could never change, yet the question stirs something long buried. Hugo presses his forehead to the floor, vowing absolute devotion if granted such a chance. He asks whether it is truly possible. Lucien answers without hesitation, swearing on the honor of the Valdic family. As long as Hugo maintains integrity and does not disgrace himself, status will never bar his path. Lucien asks him one final thing: whether he wishes to live as a person rather than a tool. Hope fills Hugo's chest, a sensation he has not felt in years. Days later, inside the palace, servants gather with tense curiosity. Lucien arrives and seats himself casually at the front, one leg resting atop the table. Hans and Hugo stand behind him. At Lucien's signal, Hugo steps forward and introduces himself as the one who will now assist the Lord. A sharp, restrained smile forms on Hugo's face, calm and predatory, like a hunter surveying unfamiliar territory. He declares his intent to work well with everyone, marking the beginning of his new role. Sometime later, inside the palace, Lucien sat with a calm and composed expression while several servants stood around him. He lightly brought his hands together, signaling that the introductions were finished, and instructed them to summon the head maid. One of the servants hesitated, clearly uneasy, and questioned why she needed to be called so abruptly. Lucien responded casually, explaining that the head maid needed to formally greet him. His thoughts drifted back to the previous day, when she had scolded him without any restraint. He made it clear that such treatment would not be tolerated again, and since there was no alternative, the matter had to be properly reported to her despite her busy schedule. Lucien quietly observed the servants' reactions and found them exactly as he expected. The servant who had spoken earlier glanced around nervously and warned the others not to act impulsively. Another quickly agreed, stating that none of them wanted to be dragged into unnecessary trouble. At that moment, Lucien realized that the servants had already reached a point where they no longer respected him. In their eyes, he was nothing more than a decayed rope, barely worth holding onto. If that was how they saw him, then he would make sure they understood their mistake. One servant stepped forward from the center of the room and urged Lucien to reconsider the situation. He reminded him that Lord Geordie placed great importance on the head maid, and given that fact, lowly servants like them had no authority to interfere. As soon as he finished speaking, the others immediately followed his lead, voicing their agreement and urging Lucien to be more understanding. They accused him of deliberately stirring trouble when all they wanted was to stay out of conflict. Their overlapping voices grew louder by the second. Seeing this, Hans could no longer restrain himself. He clenched his teeth and shouted at them to regain their senses, reminding them that the true master of the palace was Lord Lucien, not the second master, Geordie. Hugo watched the entire exchange from the sidelines, a faint smile forming on his face. He stepped forward calmly and asked Hans to leave the matter to him. Turning toward the servants, Hugo dismissed the situation, stating that harsh words were wasted on people like them, since they were incapable of listening. Hugo then turned to Lucien and stated that he already knew what needed to be done. Lucien looked at him with mild curiosity and asked if he had a plan. With a cold and detached expression, Hugo explained that dealing with people who did not know their place was simple. Loyalty could be beaten into them, even if the process became somewhat rough. He asked for permission to proceed. The servants' faces immediately turned pale. Lucien listened quietly before offering a faint smile. Hugo's quick thinking was exactly why he had recruited him in the first place. Luck had also been on Lucien's side. Hugo had been caught while still in the early stages of his drug dealings. Had it gone any further, even Lucien would not have been able to intervene. Lucien placed a hand on Hugo's shoulder and granted his permission. This was precisely the outcome he wanted. With a faintly villainous smile, he reassured Hugo and told him to give them a proper demonstration. Hugo calmly acknowledged the command. A chill ran down the servants' spines as Hugo began walking toward the one standing in the center of the room. Up close, his presence felt overwhelming, like an enormous wall towering over a helpless ant. The servant forced himself to remain calm, convincing himself that Hugo was nothing more than an outsider, a newly recruited subordinate. Gathering his courage, he warned Hugo not to act without understanding the situation and advised him to choose the correct side if he wished to survive. Hugo looked down at him coldly, questioning whether he truly understood how cruel the forces backing him were. The servant scoffed, mocking the idea that Hugo would risk his life for a handful of coins. Hugo clenched his fist and quietly dismissed those words as nothing more than a pathetic final statement. Before the servant could fully grasp what was happening, Hugo's punch landed. The impact was savage. The servant was sent flying across the room and crashed to the ground. His face immediately swelled, twisted beyond recognition, and he lost consciousness almost instantly. The hall fell into dead silence. Han stood frozen, his face drained of all color, while the remaining servants recoiled in terror as Hugo walked past the fallen body. One of them finally shouted that this had gone too far, declaring that such violence was unacceptable. Even if Lucien had brought Hugo here, that did not grant him the right to act in this manner. Hugo slowly turned his head toward them, his gaze heavy and filled with irritation. He informed them that he had more than enough authority to act, as his specialty was dealing with insane fools who did not know their place. The servants instinctively stepped back. Moments later, heavy footsteps echoed from outside the hall. Before anyone could react, the massive doors at the far end were forced open. Two servants dragged someone inside. It was the head maid. She struggled violently, shouting and demanding to know if they thought they could get away with such behavior. One of the servants holding her snapped back, ordering her to remain quiet and follow obediently, warning her that her refusal to understand the situation would only prove her foolishness. The head maid turned sharply, furious that anyone would dare speak to her that way. However, the instant she took in the scene inside the hall, her anger froze. Servants were kneeling on both sides of the room, bruised, trembling, and broken. Near the window stood Lucien, his back turned as he calmly gazed outside, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. One servant hastily announced that they had brought the head maid as instructed. Lucien slowly turned around, with a gentle wave of his hand and a faint smile. He greeted her, remarking that she had finally arrived. He casually explained that he had only asked the servants to escort her, though it seemed they had grown a bit too enthusiastic. Shock quickly transformed into rage. The head maid demanded an explanation, and questioned whether Lucien truly believed he could escape the consequences of such actions. She forcefully pulled one arm free and threatened him, invoking Lord Geordie's name, and declaring that this would not be tolerated. She offered to end the matter immediately if Lucien stopped now. Lucien remained completely unfazed. He calmly dismissed the idea that this would end so easily. Reaching for the table, he picked up a whip and gripped it firmly with both hands, stating that this was only the beginning. The moment the head maid saw the whip, her confidence shattered. Her voice trembled as she hastily tried to retract her earlier threats, claiming he could say whatever he wanted. Lucien's smile vanished. His eyes turned cold and devoid of emotion as he declared that today she would meet her end right there. Lucien reflected on execution as a demonstrative method that had been used since ancient times. It served as a warning and an efficient means of control. It carried justification, had a clear target, and most importantly, it certainly left an impression. Because of this, there was no need to change the entire structure. With this act alone, he could inform the Grand Duke that the weak and trashy Third Prince no longer existed. After reaching that conclusion, Lucien ordered the guards to seize the head maid, Jenny. Even while being restrained, Jenny maintained a mocking smile. She believed Lucien would not dare kill her, and reminded him of her connection to Lord Geordie. She revealed that Lucien's mother had once been Lord Geordie's wet nurse, and since she was her child, she claimed they were essentially siblings. Lucien dismissed her words coldly. He regarded dragging one's brother into matters at the moment of death as pathetic, and told her to say whatever else she wished if she had more to add. Jenny attempted to bring up Lord Geordie again, but Lucien cut her off immediately. He made it clear that she had completely misunderstood the situation. The system percentage dropped to 21%. Lucien stated that he already had more than enough reasons to kill her. Her crimes included insulting a noble, neglecting her duties, incitement, and embezzlement. He pointed out that she had misunderstood her position simply because they were raised by the same wet nurse. He made it clear that the Geordie she kept mentioning could not save her. At most, Geordie might strike Lucien a few times, and even that would not matter. If their father were to intervene, it would be even worse for her, as Geordie would not even be able to protect her. In fact, Lucien believed their father might even reward him for properly dealing with a troublesome individual. Geordie was merely one of the heirs, no different from the person standing before her. The system percentage dropped again to 20%. Lucien reminded her that he had already given her a chance, and that the current outcome was entirely the result of her own actions. Jenny's composure finally broke. Her body trembled as fear took hold of her, and she begged for forgiveness, admitting that she had been wrong. Lucien struck her swiftly and told her to blame her bad luck. Elsewhere, news of the situation reached Lord Geordie. He immediately began running toward Lucien's residence, his mind filled with disbelief. Just a few days earlier, Lucien had backed down after being humiliated by Jenny. Now Lucien was suddenly acting insane, and even claiming that he would kill her. That was not the only strange detail. As a precaution, Geordie had previously stationed servants at the separate estate where Lucien lived. Those servants should have stopped Lucien, since things had escalated this far. It meant Lucien had already taken control of all the servants. Geordie continued rushing forward when he encountered Oliver and Gert. They tried to reassure him, insisting that the report had to be wrong and suggesting that he calm down. They believed someone like Lucien would never lay a hand on anyone. They also emphasized that Lucien was afraid of Lord Geordie. Geordie agreed with them and concluded that the report must indeed be false. At that moment, a scream echoed from another room. Geordie rushed toward the sound and witnessed a horrifying scene. Lucien was violently beating Jenny. Her back was completely covered in blood. Geordie shouted in shock at what Lucien was doing. Lucien calmly questioned why his elder brother was there and apologized, stating that he was busy at the moment. Lucien then instructed Hugo to force Jenny to stand up again. Geordie ordered Oliver and Gert to save Jenny. Both of them rushed forward, but Lucien immediately issued a warning to Hugo. He declared that if anyone came within 3 feet of them, her throat was to be slit. Oliver and Gert stopped in their tracks. Hugo pressed a knife against Jenny's throat and declared that he would take full responsibility. He stated that there would be no chance for her survival under any circumstances and told them to leave it to him. Jenny cried out in desperation, calling for Lord Geordie to save her. Geordie threatened Hugo, shouting that if he did not obey his order, not only would his head fall, but his entire family would be executed and hung from the city walls. Hugo responded without hesitation. He stated that such a thing would never happen. Lucien was his master, and any order not given by his master meant nothing to him. The system percentage dropped to 17%. Hugo made it clear that whatever happened from that point onward, if it was his master's order, carrying it out was his duty. Geordie then turned his attention to Lucien and demanded to know what Jenny had done to deserve such treatment. Lucien responded by stating that Jenny had insulted her superior, defied orders, and interfered with financial matters. He explained that he had merely given her the punishment she did. It is explained to us that within House Valdec, the first young master, Tristan Valdec, and the second young master, Geordie Valdec, are currently locked in a succession war. In other words, until the decisive day arrives for Geordie. This period is critical for him to solidify his position above all else. However, Geordie was recently publicly humiliated by Lucien. As a consequence of that incident, he suffered a serious loss and was forced to cast aside his closed knight. Sir Hendrik, in a situation like this, if Geordie were to fail once again to protect Jenny, who functioned as his own hands and feet, it would inevitably become the turning point where distrust and fractures would begin spreading among those who followed him. In short, Geordie had been driven into a complete checkmate. Accepting the situation, Geordie conceded defeat and told Lucien that he had won, demanding that Jenny be released. Oliver, Gert, and Hans stood frozen in shock. Hugo continued holding a knife tightly against Jenny's throat as she cried in terror. Lucien responded with a smirk upon hearing Geordie's words. To him, the declaration was not even amusing. He viewed it as an attempt to brush everything aside with a single sentence after destroying someone else's precious livelihood. He regarded Geordie's attitude as arrogance, questioning whether noble blood somehow made every word valuable. To Lucien, nobles truly were hypocritical. Lucien then addressed Geordie again, dismissing the idea of winning altogether. He stated that he had merely fulfilled his duties as the third young master. Embezzlement, after all, was a crime from which no one could escape, regardless of status. If the matter were simply covered up and forgotten, public opinion would inevitably turn against them, even though Geordie earnestly requested an end to the matter. Lucien claimed that he lacked any justification to simply let it go. Geordie clenched his fists and grit his teeth, abandoning restraint and demanding clarity. He ordered Lucien to stop speaking in circles and plainly state his demands. In response, Lucien swiftly moved the blade closer in front of Jenny's face. Jenny broke down further, overwhelmed by fear. While Geordie ground his teeth in helpless fury, Lucien maintained his smirk and explained that since ancient times, those who laid hands on another person's property were punished in kind. Such individuals were typically forced to repay several times the stolen amount. With that precedent established, Lucien pressed Geordie to decide the price himself. The scene then shifts smoothly to Duke Sigmund standing before a window. Lost in deep thought, his mind drifts back to events from a few days earlier. The memory reveals the head butler, explaining that the incident had been resolved in that manner. In the recollection, Duke Sigmund questioned whether the report was true. The head butler affirmed that he had personally confirmed it. Geordie had paid Lucien 10 times the amount involved in the embezzlement case. Additionally, Lucien had recruited an outsider named Hugo to swiftly root out the spies planted within his annex. As a result of these actions, Lucien's annex had become more heavily guarded than any other area in the estate. The narration then returns to the present. Lucien arrives before Duke Sigmund and asks whether his father had summoned him. Duke Sigmund observes Lucien with a strange and unfamiliar gaze. Lucien senses immediately that something about his father's stare feels different from before. Duke Sigmund remarks that Lucien had caused quite a stir recently. Lucien downplays the situation, stating that it was nothing grand, and that he had merely disciplined those who failed to recognize their rightful master. Duke Sigmund counters by stating that Lucien's actions had disgraced his brother, and that Geordie would not forget this humiliation for a long time. He warns Lucien that consequences will follow. Lucien responds calmly, stating that there is nothing to handle, as it was simply a matter of setting hierarchy and order straight. Duke Sigmund smiles quietly before continuing. He explains that Geordie continues to pick fights with Lucien, and that he, as the family head, made a choice that would not bring shame to the Valdec name. Lucien is given freedom to strike back. However, Duke Sigmund makes it clear that if the conflict escalates to the point of causing harm, he will side with Geordie regardless of who is right or wrong. Lucien reacts in shock, struggling to comprehend his father's stance. Duke Sigmund questions Lucien's surprise and explains his reasoning. Although Geordie has a hasty personality, his contributions to the family over the years are substantial, accounting for 54%. In contrast, Lucien spent an entire year idling away. From the perspective of the family head, choosing the son who has contributed more is only natural logic. Lucien states that, if his understanding is correct, this sounds like an instruction to trample his brother and rise upward. Duke Sigmund responds by telling Lucien to build his strength and become an asset to the family. Only then will he understand the answer to his question. Lucien realizes that his father intends to heighten his sense of crisis, to force him to advance faster. Furthermore, since Duke Sigmund declared this stance so definitively, it could only mean that the succession structure would be finalized soon. This was why his father wanted him to hurry and seize his position before it was too late. Lucien reflects bitterly on whether all fathers were normally like this, lamenting the opportunity he had missed. Still, he acknowledges that his father worries deeply about his sons. With that thought, Lucien reaches into his pocket and pulls out a letter. He calmly states that if his father is concerned, then it might be worth considering that he has already prepared his next move. He emphasizes that it is not just any move, but a very big one. Sigmund Lucien forcefully took the paper from his son's hands, crumpled it and tore it apart. His presence carried overwhelming authority, as he demanded confirmation of whether the report was truly accurate. If this matter was nothing more than an excessive and misguided attempt to establish public service, he expected the truth to be revealed immediately. Lucien responded with composure, stating that the report contained not a single lie. He explained that, following the instructions of the writer Logren, their investigation had already progressed significantly. Insiders who were involved in distributing drugs had been secured, and the evidence was solid enough to be verified immediately. At that moment, an overwhelming blue aura erupted from Sigmund's body, filling the room with crushing pressure. Lucien was instantly overwhelmed by it, his body reacting instinctively to the sheer force. Sigmund's expression darkened as his gaze sharpened into something resembling a death glare. The name Bernhard surfaced in his thoughts, identified as the shameless son of a marquis. Rage surged as Sigmund reflected on the audacity of defiling the land of Waldeck. The pressure intensified, and Lucien began to sweat heavily. His breathing grew strained as the suffocating weight bore down on him. He recognized the sensation immediately as pressure meant to test resolve. This was the weight carried by those who protected the Empire, the invisible force wielded by the sword of the Waldeck family, and the overwhelming presence of its master. Lucien feared what might happen to him if it continued any longer. Despite this, he forced himself to calm down and requested permission to raise one final point. Sigmund acknowledged him and allowed him to proceed. Lucien explained that even if the truth were reported to His Majesty, Marquis Logren would attempt to sever all loose ends and evade responsibility. All illegal activities had been conducted through the upper echelons, leaving no visible trace of direct involvement. Even if they attempted to dig deeper by force, the Emperor's caution regarding factional conflicts would ultimately lead to arbitration. In the end, the Waldeck family's heinous act would result only in financial loss and nothing more. Lucien reflected that losing money alone was insufficient punishment and suggested that a far greater price should be paid. The atmosphere fell completely silent. Sigmund observed Lucien closely, surprised by the sharpness of his judgment and wondering when his son had become so adept at reading the situation. He prompted Lucien to elaborate on his thoughts. Lucien revealed that he had already secured a method to prevent the enemy from escaping. Earlier, an insider had surrendered to him. Though the man held no noble title, he was deeply trusted by Logren and had risen to an executive position. Sigmund recalled the head butler's earlier report about Lucien recruiting a man named Hugo from outside. He realized that this Hugo must have been the insider Lucien referred to. The situation unfolding now aligned with the third scenario Sigmund had once anticipated. Lucien's strategy involved using the traitor to set a reverse trap. From Logren's perspective, It would be unthinkable for the executive responsible for the drug operations to betray them. Lucien had carefully coordinated matters so that the agreement plan appeared to be proceeding smoothly. It would not take long before Logren's key figures were forced to step into the open. Sigmund acknowledged that this plan could not be dismissed lightly, but he also identified a critical flaw. The entire strategy depended on a single variable. It relied completely on a traitor from the back alleys. Human nature, Sigmund believed, could never be fully resisted. Trusting such a man was inherently unreliable, and he warned that one could not take even a single step together with someone like that. Lucien remained silent for a brief moment before clarifying that he was not trusting the man himself, but rather betting on his desire. That desire was a burning ambition to become a knight and achieve fame throughout the empire, carving his name into history. Sigmund recognized this as an old and almost forgotten remark. Lucien believed that such a dream was something any man could long for obsessively. He chose to believe in that dream, just as he himself had done in his previous life. Sigmund reflected on this reasoning, finding it sentimental yet sincere. He acknowledged that this motivation explained why Lucien was willing to go to such lengths. He then considered the consequences if everything were to fail. Lucien made it clear that he had no intention of avoiding responsibility. Any mistake he made would be his alone to bear. He was prepared to pay the price, even if it meant placing a title on the line. After hearing this, Sigmund instructed that once Lucien's body fully recovered, he should present himself at the training ground. Lucien acknowledged this instruction. Uncertain of what would follow, Sigmund then revealed his intent to personally teach Lucien the Lion's Heart sword. With that declaration, Lucien was formally recognized as one of the candidates for the next head of the household. As the scene transitioned into the night, Sigmund stood alone in his chamber. Reading by the window, moonlight streamed in, softly illuminating a corner of the room. The head butler entered quietly and expressed deep shame. He lamented that in Meltheim, the heart of the Waldeck family, such disgraceful acts had occurred under their watch. Sigmund immediately stopped him, taking responsibility for the situation. He admitted that he had ordered the butler to focus solely on the border issues, and acknowledged that doing so had left their internal defenses vulnerable. He noted that the third son being the first to uncover the truth was a matter of pure luck. The scheme had been carefully constructed by Bernhard to avoid detection. The head butler observed that Bernhard's true intention was not profit or power expansion, but rather to tarnish his master's honor. Sigmund agreed, believing that Bernhard intended to use the incident later as leverage when dealing with his majesty. He reflected on how the Marquis, blinded by concern for his own safety, had lost sight of the Empire's reality. Sigmund then inquired about Hugo, the man attached to the third son. The head butler explained that on the surface, Hugo was known as a gangster who ran a gambling house. In truth, he was the leader of a newly formed organization that had even shocked the underworld. He was not the type of man who would easily submit to serving another. The head butler himself had personally gone to meet Hugo and welcomed him as a subordinate. He praised the astonishing growth of the young master. Sigmund repeated the word growth thoughtfully. His mind turned to Hugo, recognizing him as someone who stood out even in the underworld where cunning and cruelty reigned supreme. Such a man would have been trampled long ago if he relied on empty promises to achieve his dreams. Hugo had seen Lucien's potential and recognized in him the image of a lord worth risking one's life for. Sigmund informed the head butler that, although it was earlier than planned, he intended to open the path for the third child, acknowledging the abilities Lucien had demonstrated. The head butler recognized the significance of those words. Sigmund then declared his intention to begin passing down the family's vision, starting the very next day. The head butler smiled, affirming that it was a proper and decisive choice. He asked whether Sigmund had someone in mind to serve as a swordsman instructor. Sigmund requested that Lord Eisen be summoned. The head butler was visibly shocked by the name. Sigmund remarked that it would be a pity to let such a horn break in old age, and that this would surely become a meaningful time for him as well. After hearing the news that Lucien had become an official successor candidate, Hans started laughing and crying at the same time. Overwhelmed by the revelation, he struggled to believe it and kept repeating that what he had just heard could not be a joke. He emphasized again and again that Lucien had truly become an official successor candidate. Unable to control his emotions, Hans dropped to his knees and sat on the ground, crying openly. Lucien, clearly annoyed by the reaction, tried to stop him and firmly repeated that he had already confirmed it many times, questioning how many more affirmations it would take for Hans to finally believe him. Seeing the situation getting out of hand, Lucien turned to Hugo and told him to do something about the kid. Hugo stepped in, picked Hans up, and asked him to calm down respectfully. Hugo then explained that considering the young master's abilities, this outcome was only natural. He added that looking at the path the young master would walk in the future, It would not be appropriate for a senior who served as his right-hand man to be so shaken by the news. Hearing those words, Hans froze in shock as the realization hit him that he was being acknowledged as the right-hand man. Suddenly, a visible smile appeared on Hans's face, and his pride surfaced as he brushed it off lightly. He reacted with exaggerated confidence at the mention of being the right-hand man, shaking it off with a casual shrug, marked by a brief pause and gesture. He then downplayed himself, acknowledging that while he had served the young master the longest, he was still lacking in many areas. He added that with someone as outstanding as Hugo present, he could not possibly claim such a position for himself. Hearing this, Hugo smiled calmly and remarked on how Hans remained humble as always, noting that it was exactly what one would expect from senior Hans. Hans responded with a smile of his own, teasing Hugo by questioning why he kept doing that, and mockingly calling him the left-hand man, Junior Hugo. Watching their exchange, Lucien smiled quietly to himself and reflected that experienced hires truly were different. After that brief thought, Lucien crossed his arms and addressed Hans seriously. He stated that what Hugo had said was not wrong. He explained that before the matter was officially announced within the house, informing only the two of them followed a similar and reasonable logic. Lucien then glanced at Hans, who looked extremely excited. As Lucien observed him, his thoughts turned analytical. He acknowledged that Hans was timid and that his frail nature could become a weakness. However, he also recognized that Hans genuinely cared for him and possessed the grit to remain steadfastly by his side, even in adverse conditions, a quality he internally weighed with certainty. Lucien continued reflecting that if Hans gained more experience, matured further, and became capable of managing internal affairs, he would grow into a more reliable rearguard than anyone else. His gaze then shifted to Hugo, and his thoughts moved seamlessly. He felt there was no room to doubt Hugo's abilities at all. He concluded that all he needed to do was open a path for Hugo to become a knight. Only then could Hugo's abilities be drawn out to their fullest potential, allowing him to become a knight who served Lucien directly and acted as a powerful sword in the future. With that realization, Lucien reaffirmed to himself that this was the time to prioritize quality over quantity. One by one, he simply needed to build them up properly. Lucien then addressed both of them with a calm but firm tone, explaining that things were going to become very busy from that moment onward. He made it clear that the road ahead was a journey he could not navigate alone, and that it could only be completed if they walked it together. Hearing this, Hugo became serious and expressed his resolve, stating that he would not disappoint the young master. Beside him, Hans smiled proudly and affirmed his loyalty, confidently telling Lucien to leave everything to them. With that resolve established, the scene smoothly shifted to the following morning at the peaceful castle. Sunlight streamed through the castle halls, reaching deep inside. Lucien stood there with his eyes closed, quietly lost in thought. His mind drifted back to his past life, where he had scoured every corner of the continent in search of a single thing. That pursuit had been the essence of the ancestors' martial arts, a power said to elevate the realm of the sword. Those teachings revolved around sword forms, and among them existed a realm one step higher than the rest, known as advanced sword forms. Yet despite suffering relentlessly, enduring humiliation and hardship like a dog, what he ultimately obtained was not the advanced sword forms he had longed for. He had not even reached the intermediate sword forms that only knight captains were allowed to learn. Instead, all he had managed to acquire was a degraded version used by apprentice knights. In reality, even learning sword forms at all was something unattainable without noble blood. For a mere mercenary, receiving the chance to learn any sword form was nothing short of heavenly luck. Still, those who were weaker than him continued to learn higher-ranking sword forms and eventually overwhelmed him in battle. Each time he failed to protect his squad members because of that gap, the thirst and craving for sword forms tormented him even more deeply. As those memories surfaced, Lucien clenched his fist. He reflected that someone like him had now been given an unexpected opportunity. This opportunity had been passed down only to the House Valdec's successor candidate and their closest aides. It was an ancient sword form that far surpassed even advanced sword forms. It was the chance to learn the Lionheart sword. The magnitude of that swordsmanship filled him with awe. The tension built within him even before it had begun. The scheduled time to learn swordsmanship was still some distance away, yet his excitement was already uncontrollable. He let out a quiet, self-aware smile as he realized he had been pacing around since dawn due to his excitement. He concluded that it would be best to calm his mind by circulating his energy before the lesson began. Lucien then sat down on the ground, a gentle smile forming on his face. He reflected on how, in his past life, he had learned swordsmanship without any proper system. He had survived by stealing techniques and gathering scraps of knowledge wherever he could. Because of that, he had never even had someone he could truly call a master. As that thought settled, his smile deepened slightly. Living a second life, he realized, truly was something extraordinary. Lucian was being quietly observed from afar, without his awareness. Hidden in the shadows, someone watched his every movement with calm focus. As time passed, it was revealed that the observer was Sir Eisen himself. A faint smile appeared on Eisen's face as he reflected internally. A considerable amount of time had already passed, yet Lucian had not wavered even once. There was no sign of hesitation or instability in him. The weak and fragile version from his past was nowhere to be seen. This moment smoothly transitioned into a scene from some time earlier. The setting shifted to a private dinner, where Duke Sigmund and Eisen were seated together. As they shared the meal, the two engaged in a serious and thoughtful conversation. During that dinner, Duke Sigmund proposed the idea of Eisen taking on the role of Lucian's teacher. At that time, Sigmund had believed there was no hope left. However, upon reassessing the situation, he had begun to notice certain aspects that stood out. Those aspects were worth careful attention. He also believed that guiding Lucian would serve as a brief form of entertainment for Eisen. Eisen, listening calmly, acknowledged that if the Duke himself had made such a request, then Lucian's talent could not be ordinary. At that point, Sigmund reflected further, emphasizing that the matter went beyond mere talent. What truly surprised him was Lucian's mindset. It was something entirely unexpected. He believed that Eisen would understand the meaning of his words once he saw Lucian for himself. The narration then returned to the present. The scene once again showed the great sword saint, Eisen Breitner, watching Lucian closely. As he continued to observe him in silence, a proud smile formed on his face. That smile reflected his recognition of Lucian's unwavering resolve and extraordinary inner strength.